not here right now, but he is. He indicated he was going to be back approximately 2 o'clock.
All right, excellent. All right, we still got about 3 minutes here or so left, but I would check on that. I'd like to thank Mr. Howell for buying us a case of water here.
Mr. Strum paid for it. We got a deal on it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Howell, for bringing the case of water purchased by Mr. Schrum.
Charge it to Kate's, huh?
Charged to Mr. Cates.
Yep.
He's ignoring us for good reason.
Me?
Yes, for good reason. All right.
You're in the clear.
And if Mr. Lansford happens to be around, we can go ahead and bring him in here, and we got a couple minutes left time-wise, but
We stand the line till it's time.
Mr. Lansford, welcome.
Hello.
As you know, Scott Rain, Chairman of the Wildlife Commission, and we have two commissioners on the telephone, one in Las Vegas. We have Mr. Macbeth there, and Mr. Vogler's also on the phone.
Hello.
Say again?
Yep, all right, that would be Las Vegas, and we also have open connection to Elko. There's 3 people there. All right, welcome. Thanks for coming out here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If you could please explain to the commission why you should be the director of Nevada Department of Wildlife, what your qualifications are, and provide us with any other information that we need to know in making our decision. And then we're going to ask each of us is going to ask you one question, and you'll have some time for the comments at the end.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here, first of all, and I know it's been trials and tribulations for you guys getting here, and so I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to interview. Like I said, it's a great honor just to be sitting here and have the potential to have the position of director of Nevada Department of Wildlife. My background is mostly with the federal government, USDA, Wildlife Services. I came up through the ranks, started at the bottom with seasonal projects back in the 90s, early 90s, and moved my way up to a field biologist, and then became the assistant district supervisor for all of Southern California. Was responsible for, at that point, there was 25 employees in that district. We worked a multitude of projects with the Navy, endangered species management, predator control for farming and ranching. We worked for the Navy, for the military, doing projects such as BASH programs, which is keeping airports relatively wildlife free, because wildlife strikes on airports is still a multi-billion-dollar industry, and every time a bird goes into a plane, even though it doesn't crash, thank goodness, there's thousands and thousands of dollars worth of damage to the plane. So we ran some BASH programs for the military, for the LAX, for San Diego International. So, and then I moved on I took the position of district supervisor. I ran half the state's wildlife services program in Nevada out of the Ely office. We had anywhere between 17 and 19 employees there, including 2 aircraft. I was in charge of running the aerial program there also. And then I came to Endow and was the predator staff biologist for 3.5 years, around 3.5 years. I'll have to go back and do the math. I guess I should have done that before I came in here. And was the staff predator biologist here, so I know the internal dealings of this office fairly well, and respect the people that work here, and they all do a great job. And so I kind of have a diverse background. Most of the a lot of the ex-directors of this program came from chiefs. And chiefs, I've managed programs as large as any division except for probably law enforcement here. So my management background and running programs is comparable to many of the past directors in this program. And it's pretty diverse, too. I think sometimes diversity of a guy's background prepares him more for challenging situations. And if he's just kind of been, down one dirt road, I've taken several roads. So my background, while diverse, is mostly management.
Excellent. We're going to start with a question from Commissioner Capurro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin, good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Mr. Capurro.
Good. Describe your management style and philosophy of holding people accountable with consequences for their actions or inactions.
I know the kind of management style I respond to, and that is I like to be empowered. I like people to believe that I'm capable of doing the job, giving me the resources to do the work, and then supporting me either financially or with resource or just as a, as a mentor. That's kind of what good managers do, because in a program this big, you can't micromanage everything. You have to just hire well and trust the people you work for. Give them the resources they need to do it, empower them to get the job done, and then oversee it and spot check it as the project progresses. And any weaknesses, you identify those, and any strengths deserve a pat on the back, because Lord knows there's never enough of those to go around. There's just more kicks in the butt than there are pats on the back. And it's, you just have to empower the people to do the work and then support them as they do the work. And I know that through my career, that's what I respond to. I feel then that, when people give you the trust and empower you to do your job, then I feel a little more sense of owing them a good job.
Thanks.
Excellent. Commissioner Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming today, Mr. Lansford. And my question is, if you were appointed to lead this department, what is the one issue that you would give the highest priority, and how would you, what would be your approach for resolving that issue?
I always hate that. What is the one thing? That's never one thing. It's always but you're right. I mean, that is always that's a great question, but it's never that simple, as you know. I guess you always play to your strengths in life. There's a couple things that I do know about things that go on in this program, and that has to do with predators. And a lot of controversy out there over what are some of our biggest issues with some of the wildlife issues we have going on. But really, anytime you do anything, you have to do it to the best of your ability. You have to do the right things for the right reasons and with the right amount of force and the right amount of effort. And really, for me, that is what the bottom line is. So if you're going to do something, you got to do it right. And doing it right starts with making sure you've got all your ducks in a row, but also starting from the most basic and looking to the most detailed. When you apply something and specifically we'll use predator management. I always looked at it as, if you have a cut on your body and you rub ointment everywhere but on the cut, you've really wasted a lot of ointment, a lot of time, and a lot of effort. So if you're not putting the ointment on the cut, then you're really wasting your time. And so with just like habitat, just like water, if you're not putting your resources in where the job needs to be done, then really everything from that kind of crumbles. So if you're not doing the right thing for the right reasons in the right places related to anything, so that's where you start. You put all your effort into figuring out what the problem is and then putting your resources where the problems are.
Thank you.
Commissioner Howell.
Kevin, good to see you here today.
Good to see you,
Thanks for
Mr.
coming.
Howell. How you doing?
What do you feel has been your best accomplishments in regards to wildlife and the area where you have been most frustrated in advancing your goals?
I've been in this field long enough that could go back a couple decades. I don't, it's small battles along the way, and usually the ability to sit back and look at what you've accomplished is not always possible in the world of wildlife. You do a lot of work that you know is the right thing to do, and you sometimes aren't rewarded with the give me the rewards now. Sometimes it may be after you leave. Sometimes it may be 20 years down the road. Sometimes it may not even be, at that point. So, instant gratification in wildlife is seldom something that you get blessed with. But over the years, just some of the things that I've been able to accomplish was, we believe it or not, in Southern California, we had a bird banding project. They have endangered species that nest along the coast of California, and one of their main predators were ravens and some other, but they also had huge problems with when they hatch. They're like little road runners, and they run around up the beaches on the sand with little cover, and the raptors would come in there and basically decimate a whole nesting hatch of birds. So we would go in there and we would everything from barn owls to great horned owls to red-tailed hawks to kestrels. We would go in there and live trap these birds, ban them, and then take them other places in California and Arizona and release them. And just to be able to remove one bird, sometimes a multitude of chicks would survive the fledgling and take off. But of that, we caught a few peregrine falcons. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service came in and said, wow, we didn't even know we had peregrines in this area. It's like, well, yeah, we've been catching them. So they actually funded us and gave us quite a bit of money to continue to, just aside from what we were doing initially, to catch peregrine falcons. And I've got some great pictures of holding some peregrine falcons, which we caught in Southern California. In some of those areas, they didn't even know they had peregrine falcons. So I always look back at that fondly, because I still have little letters and stuff from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service thanking us for assisting with, such a bird as a peregrine falcon down there. So that was kind of a highlight of the career. And then some others was getting the helicopter back in Nevada. For a long time, Wildlife Services and NDOW and used a helicopter to do some projects such as predator management here, and I think since about 2001 we hadn't utilized it, and we were missing a big gap in how we do work for not only livestock but ultimately later on down the road for wildlife. And just a few years ago we were able to get a contract in place and get a helicopter back over here, and was able to reach areas that hadn't been reached since the 90s, and I think that greatly increased the efficiency of some of the projects we had going on. So, and that, believe it or not, was no easy task for some reason. You think it would be.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jerry Lent. Mr. Vice Chairman?
Mr. Lansford, I want to welcome you, first of all. And my question is two parts. Describe how you would relate and work with the commission on long-range goals between the commission and the department, and describe how you would cooperate with the commission regarding their budget requests and policies, even if you didn't agree with some of their concepts, and also give us your definition of the role of the commission.
I may need a copy of that. I can read, so I can read back through that one. We're a public, NDOW is a publicly funded organization, and they take care of wildlife, which is near and dear to the hearts of many Nevadans, and anybody who claims to be an outdoorsman has links to NDOW, lifelong links. Whether you've ever worked for the program, if you're just a fisherman, you have lifelong links the Nevada Department of Wildlife. Nevada Department of Wildlife serves the public. The public is a broad range of ideas and theories and philosophies, and you got to listen to all of them. I think it's sometimes in management, especially in management, we place ourselves in a box, and that box is often used for several reasons: self-protection, but it's also to block out just the plethora of ideas and people out there who are always trying to provide input. That input's invaluable. I think at times, even though you may not agree with an idea, you need to listen to it and learn from it, because it's going to give you a different perspective of the problem. And so, therefore, working with the public, working with diverse ideas makes everything better in some ways. You always have to. Now, when it comes to the commission and being a director of NDOW, sometimes I understand that the direction and goals may not always be compatible, but it's all about wildlife in the end. It's all about bettering our wildlife and our quality of life for us people who consider ourselves to be outdoorsmen. It's all about that. So in the end, it's imperative and paramount that all facets and organizations work together for a common goal, and that includes the commission, that includes the county advisory boards, that includes any other agency out there that you even remotely work with. We have private land issues, we have public land issues, we have issues with management areas, U.S. Fish and Wildlife refuges. Everybody has to be on the same page, and the bottom line is we're all here to make wildlife better. And at some point, you have to just step back and realize I may not agree with that idea, but you know what, that perspective is very important. We need to consider it in our decision-making process. And sometimes I think the best thing that I have learned from wildlife and my career in wildlife is it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And if you don't respect that as a manager for a program that is put in charge of overseeing wildlife in Nevada, then you've really alienated probably the most important view out there, and that's the view of the public's.
I got a clarification. Can I ask a
Clarification?
Could you give us your definition of the role of the commission?
I think the role of the commission is, the intent of what it was created for is exactly what it is. I mean, it's representation from a multitude of interest groups out there coming together to provide oversight and overview to a program that has dealings with diverse communities out there. And I think having a commission of people who represent those diverse views and viewpoints is absolutely necessary to, just the oversight of the program. I mean, that's what it was created to do. And if their viewpoint isn't yours, that's fine. But you need to take it into consideration because they're speaking for other groups out there, and those are the people who are paying the bills. Same with the county advisory boards. I meant it's pretty important to keep a good working relationship.
All right, Commissioner Macbeth.
How you doing, Kevin?
Good. How you doing?
Pretty good. I'm here all by myself.
Me too.
I'm here all by myself.
My question is, if there's any problems with hearing this question, it is long. Then, as we did with the last candidate, it'll be reread to you. Okay, here it is. Given that the Nevada Department of Wildlife involves multiple divisions, including operations, conservation education, fisheries, game, habitat, law enforcement, and wildlife diversity, and that the director is responsible for representing the department before multiple sportsmen, conservation, and public groups, please explain to the commission how you will meet the challenges of managing the department in responding to the multiple consumptive and non-consumptive users of Nevada's wildlife resources?
I should have expected that from you, Mr. Macbeth. In many ways, each division here is, autonomous to itself, but yet it works in unity for one ultimate goal. And you almost have to look at the program as pretty autonomous in its divisions, but in its unified goal. The end goal is a goal we all have, but the paths that the divisions take to get there are pretty unique and have to be treated as such. They're unique entities, and for me, I think conservation and education is being a next game guy. This is hard to say, but conservation and education might be the most important one here. We're all talking about.
All right. Commissioner Shrum.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lansford. Thank you for coming this
How you doing?
afternoon. My question is, do you feel that the current low number of the deer is due to habitat or failure to do predator control, and what needs to be done and by whom, and how long do you think it might take?
Unfortunately, there's not one answer for the whole state. Each, like we were talking a while ago about doing the right things in the right areas for the right reason. One answer for the whole state is not correct. In every area, it's not water. In every area, it's not habitat. In every area, it's not predators. In some areas, it may be a combination of all three. In other areas, it may be one thing. And so it comes down to that again. I think you need to know what your goals are. You need to know what populations you're talking about, and we need to understand what the dynamics are that are affecting that herd. Now, I'm not going to dance around this issue at all. It's food, water, cover, and it can be adversely affected by numerous things outside that, including predators. It's not one answer. It's not two answers. It may be 50 answers here and 2 answers there. But to blanket a state with one thing, it's this or that, like I said to Mr. Cavan, it's never one thing. It's always a multitude of things. And where they are on that list is important. If the first of what's going on with these deer over here is predators, habitat, and then water, and then and that flops over here to habitat, water, and predators are somewhere farther down the list. That's what's important, is knowing what the list is, what the priorities on the list are, and then applying whatever tool or management technique it is to improve. Deer, one bad winter can really knock deer numbers down. It may take, a decade for with no other considerations out there, whether predator or whether habitat or whether water, you get a couple years of drought, and then the 100-year storm come in here, you can wipe out deer to a level. It may take a decade for those deer to return under ideal conditions. So a timetable on that, gosh, I'm not sure if anybody could ever give a timetable on some of those returns. But if you have natural fluctuations in the deer, and unfortunately here we've kind of leveled off with deer, from our high numbers back in the 80s to our huge decline in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and then we've struggled to get back to numbers since then. Predators are a funny thing. Typically on healthy herds, in numbers that are normal to a carrying capacity, they have little effect. But you take a deer herd and knock it down, but yet the same number of predators exist there, then their impact on that herd may have not drove it to that valley, but is a leading factor of what's keeping it in that valley. So really, you got to always consider that it's never one thing, and one of my frustrations when I worked here was we never tried to prioritize or look at specific areas and say, okay, here's where we think this is the problem. Here's where we think this is the problem. Here's where we think this is the problem. And have a list of these areas that we thought we knew or had an idea of what the problems were in an order that we knew on what number on that list those problems existed. And I think that's number one here. I think we should seriously, if we're talking deer and deer alone, I think it should be done with all species. We should kind of evaluate each known kind of population core we have out there and list in the order that we think the problems are affecting those herds. And if predators are within that top, whatever listing we think is our top priorities, then they need to be assessed. If they're not, then we're rubbing ointment on a cut that isn't there. And you know, it's a complex issue that takes a lot of people looking at it from a lot of different angles, because it's never one thing. If you have degraded habitat, habitat that's in less than optimal condition benefits the predators. So what's the baseline problem there? The problem may be the habitat is not supporting a healthy herd, therefore the abundance of predators is having a additive effect on the herd. But really, the underlying issue there was habitat to begin with. Now, you can control predators at the time you're doing some habitat work in there to better the habitat, and in the meantime, you can do a stopgap measure to do some predator control, which may, you know, allow a few more fawns to survive, therefore kind of holding that population until we get better weather, until we get some more optimal habitat conditions, and therefore the time of that herd recovering has been shortened, because through the bad times, you've kept a few more on the ground. So when things are ready to take off, whether we've had some good, you know, weather patterns, some good habitat work's going on with the BLM, NDOW ourselves, Forest Service, and some of those are starting to take hold, then you've actually seeded that population a little bit and held it a little, put it in a better position to recover quicker. And I think at times that's what predator management can best accomplish, is over a period of time that we're waiting for conditions to get better, it may be able to benefit that population and shorten the time of recovery.
Commissioner
If
Vogler.
we're talking deer and deer alone. It changes a little bit when you're talking sheep and isolated populations, basically on islands. You know, you have to almost look at bighorn sheep at times as an island population. They're kind of, you know, they're confined to specific habitat, and usually those are mountaintops. And you get individual lions working on a population of sheep that are struggling anyway, and you may have a little more severe right now problem than a general coyote and lion problem with deer. So it's kind of unique to each, whatever you're looking at. And if you're talking ravens and sage grouse, there's a whole nother issue there. We know ravens in some part of the state are 1,000%. There's been an increase in raven population 1,000% or more in places in Nevada since the 60s. And in that case, there's areas that just have too many ravens. And that's just that's the problem from the beginning and the end. It's not a lot of other things. There's just too many ravens.
All right. Commissioner Vogler.
Yes, sir. How are you today, Kevin?
Mr. Vogler, how are you doing?
Up and high and feeling good, thank you. Mine is short, mine is simple, and very, very near and dear to agriculture. What is your opinion of the multiple use mandate in the Tailored Grazing Act?
I'm a multiple use guy. I mean, I'm wildlife to the core. I grew up on a small ranch in New Mexico. We live in a state that's 87% public land, And I think everything from people to wildlife all have right to use those resources as long as they're not damaged. As long as we don't overuse our resources, I think that's what man is. Man is a resource-using machine, and we're knowledgeable in using those resources. We're knowledgeable in sustainable use of renewable resources. We don't always act like we are as knowledgeable as we are, but we are. I think it's a balance that can be achieved and should be achieved, because even though, we're all here right now talking about the director position for the Nevada Department of Wildlife, I think it's important to understand, in a state especially like Nevada, where it's public land, that's what it is, it's public land, that the resources, the valuable renewable resources that exist out there should be optimally utilized, and I'm for it. And I think there can be a balance, and I think there has been in many eras of our history. There have been great balances that have occurred out there, where populations of wildlife were abundant, and we were still utilizing resources out there. We're utilizing them today, and I think we can have abundant populations of wildlife as long as we're all working together and understanding that renewable resources mean renewable, but they're not renewable tomorrow. As long as you have a long-term approach to your land use management practices, then we've had those balances in the past, and we can attain those balances again in the future.
Thank you.
Commissioner Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming today, Kevin.
Mr. Wallace, how you doing?
Good. Considering this current statewide budget crisis and the loss or reduction in general fund revenue, how would you propose funding non-game and other programs without the use of sportsman's dollars?
That's a tough one, because even though I worked here, I had limited knowledge of the overall budget. And with any job that I've ever taken in the past, whenever you move from one program to the next, to the next, to the next, the budget is a learning process. It's a complicated process here, and we've all been, I think over the last 4 or 5 years, the transparency of the program has really improved, and the knowledge that everybody has over the financial situation of the programs improved. And it's complicated. I think, and this may be an unpopular question, but non-game species are important. They're keystone. Many of them are keystone species, and if we're not in tune with what's going on with a lot of things out there, then we can't appropriately be in tune with the species that everybody is most concerned about, the hunting public. So I know it's controversial, but I tell you what, I have a lot of respect for the program here and the work they do, and it's important. And for that to be no longer a part of NDOW, I think at times would be a mistake in the long term. And so I kind of support. I know it's kind of been controversial, but coming from my vantage point, they serve an important. They have an important role to play in the whole overall management scheme we do, and I think it's a necessary program within the Department of Wildlife. It's a necessary division. To what extent the funding is available to keep that one going, there's when you start talking about Q1 money and all the and the Obama bump that may be a 1 or 2 or 3 year phenomenon. Life as a public agency based on tag fees and grants, you're going to get the little roller coaster ride of financial, and at times hard decisions have to be made, and Our Governor Sandoval right now is finding that out. It's like this program's been writing checks on accounts. I mean, the state's been writing checks on accounts that's been empty for a long time. And NDOW can't do that. NDOW is so when resources become short like they are now, there are hard decisions that have to be made. But without intricately knowing the budget and saying immediately off the top of my head what would have to get the axe, I don't think that'd be appropriate for me to even conjecture at this point without having a better knowledge of incoming and outgoing. And I've been gone almost over a half a year. Things have changed a lot in that scenario. So me basing what I knew on before and answering that type of question now would not be responsible of me. But I do believe that non-game species and is something that I think needs to be part of the overall NDOW program, because it all links together, it all ties together, and whether we hunt that species or not, many of those type species are keystone species, and species that we can look to as a gauge to what's going on out there, habitat-wise.
All right, I think that's the end of our questions. Thank you for coming out and part of this process. Thank you for everybody's had a chance to look over the information you provide us. And if you have any additional comments that you'd like to leave the commission with, we got at least 15 minutes, so feel free.
Well, I don't have 15 minutes worth, but it's just a great honor. I realize that there's a lot of things going on, and I don't think we need to avoid the pink elephant in the room and saying that at this point Ken is the director, and Ken was my old boss, and I really have nothing bad to say about Ken. I looked at it as an opportunity for myself to come in here and interview for a position I would love to have and think I could perform at, and regardless of the future outcome of this, I think it's for me alone just to come back in here and sit down and at least have an opportunity to interview for a position that I hold a huge amount of respect for and regard for, and would basically be a life-changing position. When you become a head of a program that basically has ruled your whole life. I've done nothing but really done wildlife things my whole life. To have it culminate in a position as important as the director of the Nevada Department of Wildlife, it'd be an overwhelming honor and just almost a dream come true. And I know I would work hard. I think anybody that knows me has never questioned my work ethic. They may question my viewpoints, but to me, that's what makes a better final picture. Is you get everybody in the room that thinks the same. You come out with a picture that has one viewpoint, and I don't think that's the reality of life anymore. In this time we live in now, of physical responsibility, every dime needs to be accounted for. Every dime needs to be well spent. And when you stand up in front of the public and you take their money, you better be able to look them back in the eye and say, we're spending it as best as we think we can spend the money. And I think the times are going to demand that. And I would have no problem with that, because I used to be called the mentioner by my old employees in wildlife services, because if it needed to be mentioned, I was going to mention it. And I was never shy at my opinions, nor was I ever shy about standing up and saying, hey, I don't understand why we're doing it this way. And I would continue that tradition as the director of NDOW. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate you coming out.
Thank you. Thanks. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you. We'll have a brief break until 2:15.
Leave it for the next guy.
Coffee break.
And remember, when